Welcome back to Sports Krunch with Dkrom. I'm your host, Dkrom, but more commonly known in the real world as David Kromelo. And right now here at Sports Krunch with Dkrom, this is a special night. We begin our Broncos Talk edition, and this is the first episode of our Broncos Talk edition as we preview all things 2015 Denver Broncos. And I'm a Broncos fan, as I'm sure most of you who are watching are, or even if you have interest in the Broncos for fantasy football purposes or because you cheer for a rival team, that's welcome too. And we have a very special guest tonight. Chad Jensen, who joins us live from Salt Lake City, Utah. He covers the Broncos for MileHighHuddle.com, which is part of the website Scout.com, which is a growing website that covers all Eagles football from college to the pros. It's good to have you on the show, Chad. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, David. I'm doing good, buddy.
Yeah, thank you for joining the show, and let's move right along here. To the biggest question on Broncos fans' mind is, now that the team has concluded its offseason workouts and is off till training camp, the biggest thing on Broncos fans' minds, I bet right now, is will they re-sign Demaryius Thomas to a long-term deal by the July 15th deadline? And unfortunately for those people who are hoping they are, I got some bad news in case you missed it. Mike Kliss, the respected reporter who's covered the Broncos for decades, formerly of the Denver Post, now with the NBC affiliate in Denver, reported that he was not optimistic about the Broncos reaching a new deal with Demaryius Thomas. Said he cited the gulf between the two highest paid receivers right now, and Calvin Johnson, who's making over $16 million a year, and Mike Wallace, who's making $12 million a year. And he said that the Broncos are going to have to go very close to Calvin Johnson range to satisfy Demaryius Thomas, and that is apparently something that John Elway does not believe in doing. So my first question about the Demaryius Thomas is, have you heard any updates in recent days? Because I know one of your colleagues at Mile High Huddle, Eric Trickle, reported that they, a couple weeks ago, that they were going to start negotiations around this time. So you have any update?
You know, that's the last thing I've heard on the issue. But, $16 million for Demaryius Thomas. I don't know. I can kind of see why John Elway might be dragging his feet, if you will, on this issue, because it's not that Demaryius Thomas, isn't a top 5 receiver. I mean, he is. Over the last several years, he's proven that he's as prolific as anybody in the league when it comes to statistics, accolades, staying healthy, and all of that. But the reality is, his quarterback is Peyton Manning. And so John Elway has to weigh the options or whatever that, what have you, that, if Demaryius Thomas were to not suit up for the Broncos in 2015, whomever they chose to replace him at that spot, whether it was Cody Latimer, Bubba Caldwell, whomever, arguably could probably haul in, and this is Gary Kubiak's offense, and that kind of throws out, past history. It's kind of hard to say he's going to catch another 95 balls and go for 1,400 yards or whatever. But I think it's safe to say that, whoever they plugged in, if Demaryius Thomas weren't able to play, he's probably going to get over 1,000 yards receiving, 70 or 80 balls, close to double digits, especially if we're talking about Cody Latimer. So, is he really worth $16 million? Probably not, especially when you have a shiny second-round pick on deck, waiting to take his place.
That's a very good point, and we will get to Cody Latimer in just a little bit. However, not all Broncos fans shared that sentiment, and I actually agree with you. As good as Demaryius is, he is not otherworldly as Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson is the LeBron James of the NFL, folks. He has that rare combination of size, speed, strength, you name it. And as amazing as Demaryius is, he's not quite Calvin Johnson, as I'm sure you'd agree. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I don't want to knock him and say that, he doesn't deserve to be one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL, because I do believe that he does. But for a team like the Broncos, Can you really justify spending that kind of money on a wide receiver when your quarterback is Peyton Manning and you got guys like Von Miller, who's going to be commanding a gargantuan mega contract extension at the end of this season? It's hard to justify $16 million. Closer to 12, like what he's playing under, basically 12.8 or whatever it might be under the franchise tag. That's something that the Broncos could probably live with. But as you say, Thomas sees himself in the same ballpark as Calvin Johnson, and I'd have to agree with you. As good as Thomas is, he's not going to take over a game on a week-in, week-out basis like we've seen Megatron do throughout his career. And I can understand the sentiment that some people throw out that Thomas is, basically Peyton Manning dependent, or that he's a product of the Peyton Manning effect. I understand that, even though I disagree with it at a certain level. But Thomas is not Calvin Johnson. $16 million, he's not worth it.
He is not, like I said. Calvin Johnson is quarterback proof, and Demaryius might be quarterback proof only to a certain degree, whereas Megatron can play with any quarterback. So I'm not saying it's somewhere in between. He's not a product of Peyton Manning, but he probably wouldn't be putting up these Star Wars numbers, dare I say, if it wasn't if Peyton wasn't the quarterback. But there were some other fans who see this in another issue, and a lot of other people think that John Elway, that if a deal is unable to get done with Demaryius Thomas, it's going to make him be perceived, whether fairly or unfairly, as a low baller, and that will make players, whether you mentioned Von Miller, like Von Miller as a free agent at the end of next year, that might create a hesitancy within his camp to be willing to negotiate a deal with John Elway, because they think he's too lowballing, he's too cold, he's too callous. And James Merrilat, a respected reporter in the Denver area from MileHighSports.com, went on a Twitter rant a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to read you some of the tweets this year. Quote, "If you believe that the Broncos won't re-sign Demaryius because of cap issues, you're an orange Kool-Aid drinker to the nth degree. Look at the contracts that come off the books in 2016. Look at what the cap number will be. That's just a silly spin job." Oh, so now the save money for the Thomas's angle is turning to the save money for Von line. Kicking the can down the road, folks. Shane Ray was drafted to replace Von Miller. Number 58 won't get a big contract here either. Does Merrilat have a point, or is he overreacting?
He's definitely overreacting. Listen, Von Miller is here to stay. I mean, you can argue that when he had his suspension and then even injuring his his ACL and all that might have at the time complicated the Broncos' perspective on the prospect of extending Miller. But I'm telling you, Shane Ray was not drafted to replace Von Miller. Shane Ray was drafted to replace DeMarcus Ware. Von Miller is very much a part of the organizational long-term paradigm. He's going to be here to stay. And in regards to the whole idea of Elway developing a reputation for being a lowballer, I submit to you the amount of money that he spent on free agents, tens of millions of dollars over the last 3.5, 4 seasons. I mean, it's ridiculous to even, in my opinion, to even go down that road. Again, it just comes down to John Elway looking at the reality that is in a Peyton Manning offense. Is Demaryius Thomas truly worth $16 million? And the answer is no. Hopefully, it's my hope that they can come to some kind of a middle ground. If Thomas sticks to his guns and he'll have to eventually play out the season on a franchise tag, and he'll then be, probably allowed to walk down the road, or as this fella said, kick the can down the road. But again, comparing it to Von Miller and all that, I don't see it, how you could really make that connection.
I don't see it either. And for example, look at what the New Orleans Saints are doing this year. They see that they have a quarterback that is aging and is closer to the end than the beginning of his career at Drew Brees. And I was honestly shocked the moment I read it. Oh my God, why on earth would they trade Jimmy Graham? Why on earth would they trade Jimmy Graham? The reason why is they don't think Drew Brees can carry a team anymore. Drew Brees is 36 years old, and they're doing the right thing for him. Drew Brees is still smart enough to make any receiver produce healthy numbers, and they're going to run the ball more anyways with Mark Ingram and C.J. Spiller. And come to think of it, I actually agree with what the Saints did by trading Jimmy Graham. So if the Saints can let Jimmy Graham go because Drew Brees is close to finished, arguably, that after Peyton Manning goes and the Broncos transition to more of a run-first defensive-oriented team, what's the point in blowing $16 million on a wide receiver?
Exactly. And the reality is probably the best case scenario is Peyton Manning's around to play out his contract, which takes him through the 2016 season. And as you point out, then we move into uncharted waters, likely the Brock Osweiler era, where, it remains to be seen exactly what Osweiler can do in this league. But, with Kubiak being hired and the transition to more of a run-first approach, when that time comes, yes, the Broncos are going to lean on the run. They're going to want their defense to win games, and in order for that to happen, they're going to need Von Miller, number 58, suiting up. And again, like I said, with regard to core young players, Demaryius Thomas is definitely someone the Broncos want to keep. Let's not pretend that he's worth nothing or that he has no value to the team. It's just, is he worth $16 million? No, he's not.
We are definitely in agreement here. And to all you Broncos fans who are saying, "Oh, why doesn't Elway just give him the money?" I got 4 simple words. Look at the Saints, what they're doing right now. The New Orleans Saints, what they're doing right now is probably where the Broncos are headed to. So do not be shocked at all if no deal is reached at the end of the day. And you also can't fault DT for being greedy, because it's not just him that's due for a pay raise. We got Des Bryant as well, and Ian Rappaport reported last night those negotiations are still as far apart as they've been. And you got A.J. Green, who is one of Demaryius' best friends, his offseason workout buddy, and Julio Jones due for pay raises too. So Demaryius he's just doing his job by trying to give him and his friends who are elite wide receivers in the NFL a healthy market. And if you were in his shoes, would you refuse to do that? I personally wouldn't refuse to do that. So at the end of the day, John Elway is not a lowballer and Demaryius Thomas is not greedy. So let's just leave it at that. Right, Chad?
I would agree there that, the whole mentality that, Thomas is simply not being a team player and that he's being selfish. Look, he's already made a ton of money compared to what people like us might, average American makes. But in the scheme of things, Demaryius Thomas, he's in the zone, or he's in the moment where he has probably what could be, not necessarily what will be, but what could be his only opportunity to get a top of the market mega contract that could provide financial stability for he and his family for the rest of their lives right now in the moment. And you can't fault Demaryius Thomas for doing what he's doing. Basically, the only leverage he has to effectuate whatever his objective might be and get more money is to do what he's doing, and that is not show up. And so at the end of the day, when that deadline comes around, the Broncos aren't going to be able to find him if he continues to hold out. But he's basically would be committing career suicide by not eventually joining the team and just saying, you know what, I'm going to make $12.8 million this year, and then I'm going to go make my max contract, and I'm going to try and stay healthy. I'm going to do the best I can. But you know what? $13 million isn't the end of the world for Demaryius Thomas.
It isn't, but you can't fault him for what he's doing, and you can't fault Elway for what he's doing. And now let's move on to the other biggest subject on Broncos fans' mind. It is the offensive line. And we all knew heading into this season that offensive line was arguably the biggest weakness on this otherwise stacked roster. And it arguably only got worse when Ryan Clady went down with a torn ACL in OTAs and minicamp. But I would argue that the Ryan Clady loss is not as massive as it would have been, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. Because look at his play last year. He was coming off a Lisfranc injury, the worst kind of Lisfranc injury, in my opinion. And if you look at players like Maurice Jones-Drew, Santonio Holmes, Sean O'Hara, who all suffered that injury, they were never able to regain their prior Pro Bowl, All-Pro form. Santonio Holmes is out of the league right now. Maurice Jones-Drew retired, and Sean O'Hara had a similar fate years before MJD and Santonio succumbed to that. So even with Ryan Clady, this offensive line was going to be civish. Do you agree that the Clady loss, that people are making too much of a big deal out of it when the offensive line would have been iffy even with him?
Well, I don't know that I would quite go that far, because even though Ryan Clady was, well, arguably did not deserve his Pro Bowl nod last year, he still is one of the best left tackles in the league. Even last year, coming off of that Liz Frank injury and getting back into the swing of things, he's one of the most talented and athletic and gifted left tackles in the business. And, you know, he was drafted basically by by this time Kubiak was gone, but Rick Dennison was still in town when they drafted Ryan Clady back in 2008. He was drafted to play in the zone blocking scheme. And speaking for myself, I was really excited and looking forward to seeing Clady get back into that scheme that he was basically drafted to play in and that he excelled so well in as a rookie. I mean, he gave up a half a sack as a rookie, making all 16 starts in 2008, and that's nothing to sneeze at. But, you know, as far as now that he's gone, you know, there's no crying over spilt milk. It is what it is. The Broncos have to adjust. And, you know, fortunately, they drafted a tackle relatively high in the second round in Sam Brilo. You know, the plan was going in was to plug him in at right tackle. Well, now they got to, you know, change the juxtaposition. Now he's at left tackle, and Chris Clark is going to be the right tackle. But the issue is, I think at the end of the day, with Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison's strengths as coaches and tying that into the scheme, I think the Broncos are probably going to be okay. But I can certainly understand fans' reaction and their trepidation and thinking, okay, here we have a rookie protecting Manning's blind side at left tackle. Next to him, at least today, the starting left guard is Ben Garland, who's never made a start in the history of his career. Then you have Gino Gradkowski, who's currently running as the #1 center, who did not start any games last season and was one of the worst graded centers in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus in 2013, the only year that he started through the whole season. And then it starts getting better where on the other side, you got Luis Vasquez, who is an all-pro, first-team all-pro in 2013. He's going to be the rock. He's going to be the leader of that unit that holds the group together. And my personal belief is Chris Clark, as we get all the way to the outside, you know, a lot of people and even some of my colleagues at Mile High Huddle are of the opinion that Ryan Harris or even Michael Schofield will eventually beat Clark out for that starting right tackle job. And I disagree. I think Clark is going to hold it down. I think that he's going to have he's particularly well suited, in my opinion, for the zone blocking scheme. And I think he's possibly going to have his best season as a pro, which is saying something, because in 2013, when he stepped in and started 14 regular season games, 2 playoff games in the Super Bowl for the injured Ryan Clady, he played at just under a Pro Bowl level. So I think this year going forward, there's question marks. I understand why fans are concerned, but take some solace and strength in knowing that Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison have a phenomenal track record of getting the most out of players by centering it around their scheme and not asking them to do more than they're capable of doing.
I agree with you that Kubes and Rick Dennison have an outstanding track record in developing offensive line talent. And you brought up a lot of good points that I'd like to elaborate more on. First, let's talk about the left tackle position at Ty Sambrailo. I don't know what the right pronunciation is. Some people say Sambrailo, some people say Sambrailo. I better ask him.
Well, it's actually Sambrailo. We got caught. Everyone in the Denver media got caught a little bit, red-faced, calling him Sambrailo, even while he was at CSU as a local guy. It's actually Ty Sambrailo. So FYI.
All right. Thank you very much for the clarification. I honestly am not a big fan of Ty Sambrailo based on the tape I watched of him. it was a feel-good story that the Broncos drafted a local kid who played locally in college at Fort Collins. And I have some friends who work part-time for the Broncos organization who did go to CSU. And I shortly after the Sambrailo pick, I texted them a celebratory message by saying, Ty Sambrailo got selected. And they said, and they were like so happy and giddy that one of their fellow Rams was going to stay in town to play for the Broncos, but that's another story. But as soon as they got drafted, Eric Trickle, your colleague, said, watched film on this guy. I wasn't impressed, and I watched film, and I have to agree with Eric Trickle. I see a guy that is not ready at all to play in the National Football League right now. He might have potential. I'm not saying he's going to flop, but to ask him to protect Peyton Manning's blindside this year, come on. Look at this guy. This guy, regardless of, he was a very polarizing prospect, having grades from the late first round all the way down to the fifth round. But even all those people, no matter what side of that spectrum you're on, agreed that he was a project. He's underpowered. He needs, I think my opinion is he should have used a redshirt year in the weight room. Look at him. He's raw. He plays with sloppy technique way too often. He plays upright. He gets jostled backwards by defenders. It's like a disaster waiting to happen. I'm not sure what Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison see in Ty Sambrailo that makes him qualified to be a starter right now. I don't see anything qualified that qualifies Ty Sambrailo to be a starter right now. Do you agree or disagree with me about Sambrailo? And if you disagree, what makes you think that Sambrailo is capable of picking up the slack at left tackle this year?
Well, I got a really close look at Sambrailo at the Senior Bowl. I attended the whole week of practices and watched him go toe-to-toe with, the best senior prospects, defensive line and outside linebacker prospects in the country. And, I'm really impressed, and then and now, I was really impressed with his athleticism. And I think that's going to, at the end of the day, the Broncos are going to scheme and plan around that as his strength, his athleticism as a player. What concerns me, and a lot of people, draft nicks and draft experts out there, including Eric, is his core strength. They worry that he's going to get overpowered easily in the bull rush and basically, possibly fall short sometimes in blocking because of his inability or not quite being on the level he needs to be with his strength. But, and that's a concern. And my personal opinion is, if I had my druthers, and again, it's not like the Broncos are employing me to make coaching decisions, but from the outside looking in, my immediate thought when I heard Clady went down is, although it makes perfect sense, put Chris Clark at left tackle, who has experience with the team, started several games in 2013 at left tackle, and keep the rookie at right tackle. And I was very surprised when it came out that Sambrailo was getting the first look at left tackle in place of Clady, and they were going to keep Clark over on the right side. But, I understand why people are concerned about it. Personally, he wasn't my favorite tackle prospect coming out. There were a lot of guys I liked ahead of him. But when it came time for the Broncos to pick, they tried to move up and get Cedric
Ogbuehi.
They tried to get him, but, it didn't work out. They ended up with Sambrailo, and, they're going to make hay while the sun is shining and do the best they can with them. And they know that, obviously, if it doesn't quite work out that way, they can always switch it up when it gets time for training camp and the pads go on and the hitting starts and the physicality and the intensity gets ramped up. If he's falling short, they'll put Chris Clark over there and put him over on the right side. But I'm kind of at a wait and see type. My perspective on it is I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt short term and really start to evaluate my opinion more clearly as we get into the dog days of training camp.
Indeed. I also thought that Chris Clark at left tackle would be a much better idea. Sorry, I always mumble on this show. I got to regather myself. Look at my notes. Oh, what I was going to ask you is, are they giving him a super long leash at left tackle because, in my opinion, they shouldn't give him or anybody, dare I say, a super long leash. So do you think his leash is relatively short heading into training camp? And if he fails to impress with the pads on, do you think they'll make an adjustment ASAP?
I do think that if he does ultimately fail to impress in training camp, they'll make a change. But it's also, this is one of the double-edged swords of making the decision that they did so early to put him over at left tackle is that, a young player in the NFL's confidence can be a finite thing. And, it's a great show of confidence to immediately plug him in at arguably the most important position on the offensive line and plug him in at left tackle. But conversely, if you make the decision, 5 or 6 or 7 weeks from now to pull him out of that, and even if it's starting him somewhere else on the line, ultimately you're saying, I'm sorry, but, we don't see it. You failed at some level. What you're communicating to that person is that they have failed. And that's the risk they run and the risk they're running in putting him at left tackle so early. But at the end of the day, they rolled the dice. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he does fall short in training camp. It won't shock me at all because they have a 39-year-old quarterback that they have to protect. Their season, as much as some people, ever since Manning's season ended the way it did, so many people are down on Manning and are chomping at the bit to, have the Brock Osweiler era. The reality is, without Peyton Manning, if Peyton Manning goes down, the Broncos do not win the AFC West. They're 8-8, 9-7, maybe a wild card team, possibly. Peyton Manning is the make or break factor of their season. And if they're not convinced that Sambrailo can hold up and protect him, they'll make the change. But for now, obviously, they feel confident that he can. They like what they've seen in him so far. All of Kubiak and all of Dennison's comments and out of rookie minicamp and then organized team activities in minicamp have been positive. They like what they see so far. So we'll see how it goes.
We shall see how it goes indeed. And Peyton Manning is indeed the straw that still stirs the drink here in Broncos country. When we'll talk more about Peyton Manning and his performance last season in a little bit. And now let's move on to the left guard spot. Ben Garland, like you mentioned, he hasn't started an NFL game yet, but he is a tremendous story. He served 2 years in the Air Force before joining the Broncos, and he still serves in the Air Force during the offseason, and he is one of the most beloved figures in the community due to his volunteer and charity work with the Broncos. And he has obviously worked his tail off to get to where he's at right now. And right now, they have him at left guard. And as much as that might scare a lot of people because he hasn't started an NFL game, I actually like that they're starting him at left guard because the guy they have behind him, Shelley Smith, I am no Shelley Smith fan at all. If you think I'm not a Ty Sambrailo fan, I think Shelley Smith is I just don't think Shelley Smith can do anything. Like, look, honestly, week 2, when he was with the Dolphins last year, week 2, watch that NFL game rewind, folks. Him against the Buffalo Bills. You can talk about the Buffalo Bills having the best defensive line in the National Football League all you want with 3, if not 4 studs. Like 2 or 3 times, Kyle Williams just pushed him back into Ryan Tannehill like a mannequin. Like, this isn't a guy who should be there protecting a 39-year-old quarterback. I don't care how unproven Ben Garland is. I like him over Shelley Smith any freaking day of the week. What are your thoughts on Ben Garland, and do you think he can and do you understand my sentiment?
I do. I was somewhat mystified by the Shelley Smith pickup. The only thing that I think I can really take any confidence in as far as picking up Smith, real quick before I get to Garland, is the fact that he was drafted by Gary Kubiak. The current Broncos coaching staff obviously feels, that Smith is familiar. They know what to expect from him in that regard. He's played within the scheme. And I think it's one of those things that if, in a worst case scenario, he can be a stopgap if all other measures fail. But going back to Ben Garland, if this were the 2014 Broncos, And we were talking about the team running a power scheme, throwing, the throw to run ratio being, much more on the throwing side than the running side. I would be a lot more concerned about the prospect of Ben Garland going into camp and the season as the starting left guard. But really, he's one of those guys they've kept around. The new coaching staff loves him. He's worked his tail off, and he really is suited to this scheme. He's one of the guys left over on the offensive line who really is suited for the zone blocking scheme. So of all the guys on the offensive line, I'm really excited to see what Ben Garland can do with this opportunity. He made the final roster for the first time in his career as a Bronco last season. And even though he only got, I can't remember exactly how many snaps, but less than 100 snaps on on offense. He's inexperienced, but I really think that he's going to fit in well with the zone blocking scheme. And, that inexperience, it's scary when you talk about a 39-year-old quarterback, but they're going to insulate Manning with the running game. You're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. I mean, they're going to do things scheme-wise to protect Peyton Manning and take some of the pressure off of the young guys who are still trying to figure out their place and learn how to be a starting pro in the National Football League. So I think Garland, moving forward, I'm excited to see what he does, and I'm not as concerned about him as and even Sam Brilo, to be honest with you.
Me neither. I actually feel quite comfortable with Garland because of him knowing the team and knowing the players and knowing and being a better fit for this blocking system, especially. Absolutely. And by the way, people are going to say, well, you're being unfair to Shelley Smith because he was against the best defensive line in football. That's not an excuse. I don't care who you have to block. You have to block all kinds of people in the National Football League. And if you can't be functional against the best, you don't deserve to start the National Football League. I'm very sorry. That's just my opinion. So Shelley Smith, like you said, should be I think he's just a depth body. I don't think they really intended him to start after I watched his abysmal game film last year. All I had to watch were those 3 snaps against Kyle Williams. And I said, oh, that's it. I don't have to watch anymore. But another name has surfaced in the battle for left guard. It's the Broncos' 4th-round draft choice, Max Garcia out of Florida. Garcia also played center for the Gators last year, but he also played left guard, and I think he played left tackle as well in college, and another one of the positions on the line as well. And I believe it was Mike Pfister reported that Max Garcia has entered into the battle for left guard. How much of a possibility do you think he surprises and gets that left guard job?
I don't see that happening this year, and Garcia is another guy I got a close look at in Mobile. I like Garcia. One of my colleagues, Eric Trickle, wasn't too sure about Garcia as far as being a scheme fit, but he's such, he sees him as more of a fit in a power scheme. But I think that he's got the versatility and the work ethic and the leadership qualities that eventually will pay off big time for the Broncos in the long run. I don't see him, unless injury strikes or, something unforeseen happens, I don't see him really being a factor as a rookie at left guard. But, you never know. As time moves on, I see him probably being a little bit better suited on the other side as a backup to Vasquez at right guard. But I like Garcia. I think he was a solid pick in the 4th round. It'll be interesting to see how the center, not to jump ahead, but I see him possibly being more of a factor in the center competition. But those are my thoughts on Garcia.
That's very interesting. And let's move on to the center position. Speaking of that, and you obviously mentioned Gino Gradkowski earlier. Gino Gradkowski, as you mentioned, was the worst, not one of the worst, the worst graded center by ProFootballFocus.com in 2013 when the Ravens had an off year on the offensive line with Osemele hurt and some unproven parts at center and right tackle. He was just horrendous in 2013, and he was obviously benched last year for Jeremy Zuda. And that Ravens offensive line right now is arguably a top 3 offensive line in football. And Gary Kubiak and Rick Denson did a great job with them last year, but it sure helps when you got super studs like Marshall Yan and Kelechi Osemele on your interior. So Broncos fans, don't get your hopes up that much about us reaching Ravens level this year. But they must have seen something in Gronkowski that would make them believe that he could be a quality starter. But when I looked at the film, just like Sam Brilo, I thought, I don't know what they're seeing in this guy that makes me that makes me convinced that I know what they see in order to make him qualified in their eyes to be a starter. And one of the worst offseason moves the Broncos made, in my opinion, was letting Will Montgomery walk in free agency. Will Montgomery was a steadying force for the Broncos offensive line, as bad as it was last year. He helped solidify things in the second half of the season, especially in the run game, and he's tailor-made for the zone blocking system, and yet they let him go, and they didn't even offer him a deal to stay. Do you think the Broncos made a catastrophic mistake in not asking Will Montgomery or signing Chris Myers?
Well, Chris Myers, Chris Myers is still on the back burner. He remains unsigned. Letting Montgomery walk, I was a little bit surprised, but obviously the new coaching staff coming in, for whatever reason, they didn't feel compelled to be aggressive in pursuing Montgomery. And once the team made the decision to trade Manny Ramirez as part of the trade to move up to select Shane Ray in the first round, they needed a veteran presence. I mean, Gino Gradkowski, he might not have performed well in 2013 as a starter and couldn't even beat out and win a job as a starter in 2014. But Kubiak spent a lot of time with him, as did Dennison in Baltimore last year. They got to see how he works. And I think it kind of, not to lump him in too much with Shelley Smith, but he's a guy they saw as someone familiar with the scheme, someone that they were familiar with as a player and a person, who they felt like they could rely on as a starting point veteran. And without him, we're talking about Max Garcia, a rookie, and we're talking about Matt Paradis, a 6th-round pick in 2014, who failed to make the final roster, was kept on the practice squads, basically zero, live bullets experience in the NFL. They needed someone at that point in time, and Gradkowski, I was surprised they traded what they did to get him, but at the end of the day, they needed some kind of a veteran presence there for that particular position. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I personally believe that as we get into training camp, I think that's a position that Matt Paradis stands a really, provided what we've been reading and hearing from the coaches out of OTAs, if Paradis is really coming along like they say he has, I think he has a really good shot at beating out Gradkowski for that role. But again, then you go back into overkill, saying that here we go, putting a bunch of guys, that would be 3 players in a row from the left tackle to the center with no starting experience, playing in a coaching staff's inaugural season with a new team and with a 39-year-old quarterback to boot. So that's kind of going too far and asking a lot. I kind of understand why some people would think, well, expecting to see Matt Paradis beat out a veteran, might be a little bit wishful thinking. But if he's really progressed the way that the staff says he has, I won't be surprised if he beats out Gradkowski when it's all said and done.
Neither would I, and I personally just like I said, it's kind of like the Ben Garland, Shelley Smith thing. I'd rather go with a guy like a Garland who's worked hard to get to this point over a guy who I believe has shown us exactly what he can do, which is close to nothing. So, and I'm not saying Gradkowski is as bad as Shelley Smith, but I just filled with trepidation about him as I had on all the spots on the offensive line. But you talked about – we were going to move on to the right tackle position because obviously the right guard is set in stone with Luis Vasquez, and the right tackle position. You mentioned about the difference of opinion you had with some of your colleagues about Chris Clark and Ryan Harris, and Chris Clark. Yes, he performed admirably when he subbed for Clady in 2013 at the left tackle position, but But once we got to the Super Bowl, it got exposed. That also he was exposed by Robert Mathis early in that season, when he single-handedly took over that game against the Colts, sacking Peyton for the safety, which turned the tide of the game. And Clark isn't the most reliable person for the left tackle position ever. I would disagree that he performed at a Pro Bowl level that year, because I think Peyton Manning and his quick release, his quick decision-making masks whatever offensive line deficiencies there was. And I think that's what he's been doing for his entire career here in Denver. The Broncos offensive line was never really elite. And he hid the weaknesses of the offensive line since he came here in 2012. But Ryan Harris, I think, is a guy who started several games in Kubiak's system in Houston, and based on Clark's performance at right tackle last year, I'm filled with a little bit of trepidation they're keeping him there at right tackle. Would it surprise you to a certain extent if Harris beat Clark for the right tackle job?
No, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that's how it shakes out. What would surprise me is if Michael Schofield beat both those guys out. You know, and that's another thing on the topic of Michael Schofield is, you know, Elway and Kubiak have talked many times about his versatility, that they could try him at left guard, he could play tackle. But no, I mean, I think I understand why some people are down on Chris Clark. I happen to see what he did in 2013 through a little bit more of a positive lens. I mean, the whole Broncos offensive line was exposed in the Super Bowl in 2013. I mean, the pressure wasn't just coming off the edge from Clark and Franklin. They were the worst part about the whole thing. And any quarterback, you know, if you want to stop any quarterback, especially one who's immobile like Manning, put pressure in his face, you know, get pressure inside, because even an immobile quarterback, if there's pressure off the edge, they can climb the ladder, step up in the pocket, make the throw. But if it's in their face, you know, and there's edge pressure, then it's over. And that's what we saw in the Super Bowl. So I think that whole unit was outmatched. They were outcoached. It was out-executed, all of it. Chris Clark, personally, I think he's going to keep the job at right tackle. I really do. Ryan Harris is a nice stopgap should that not quite work out. And again, it wouldn't surprise me if Harris beats him out. But it'll be interesting to see if Chris Clark manages to hold on to the job. I doubt they're going to keep two different swing tackles. It wouldn't surprise me to see Shelley Smith be on the outside looking in, getting cut. They keep Schofield and Harris. Harris is more of the swing tackle, and Schofield as a backup left guard to Garland moving forward in the season. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yes, and before we move on to the rest of the offense, let's talk about Michael Schofield. And Michael Schofield was my least favorite draft pick of the Broncos 2014 draft class, and he still remains that way. Because have you watched the film of him going against Shalik Calhoun from Michigan State? And Shalik Calhoun is talked about as a potential first-round draft choice in 2016. Shalik Calhoun just turned him into a 19th century stone gargoyle, if you know what I mean in that game. So, and seeing Shalik Calhoun do that to Michael Schofield gave me visions of Cliff Averill doing the same thing to Orlando Franklin in the Super Bowl. So that gives me fear. I think Schofield's best fit is at guard. Do you think Schofield's best fit is at guard after seeing that? Because after seeing that Shalik Calhoun film, I think guard is his best bet, because he's going to need assistance, especially in pass pro.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't impressed with the Schofield pick when they made it. And he really hasn't done anything in his short time with the Broncos to really impress me in any way. I don't think he dressed out for a single game as a rookie. I might be wrong on that, but anyway, Schofield, yeah, he's probably better suited on the inside. You know, Elway has a history of busting with offensive line, draft picks in the, Philip Blake. He hit on Orlando Franklin. It'll be interesting to see how he does with how Schofield pans out, how Sambrailo pans out, and then, of course, Max Garcia. But specifically on Schofield, he hasn't done anything to impress me. I think that I don't see him, as I mentioned, winning a starting job at right tackle. And I think when it's all said and done, they're going to keep him on the roster again this year as the backup to Ben Garland at left guard.
That is a very strong possibility. I completely see that happening. And but you mentioned John Elway, and we talked about him earlier. A lot of people think John Elway can do no wrong, and there are other people on the other side who say, well, John Elway has completely bungled the draft. Neither of those things are true. Elway has made some very solid draft picks, but for some reason, his eye for offensive line talent appears to be similar to Bill Belichick's eye for wide receiver talent. It's very quixotic eye for offensive line talent, because he often goes for those guys who are raw, who are undersized, underpowered, and that's a common trend around the National Football League. But also it's but you see it's alarming that even the tackles that we expected to be good as rookies or second-year players haven't panned out, like Eric Fisher, Luke Jokel, Jake Matthews struggled last year, Greg Robinson struggled last year. But for some reason, the offensive line transition from college to the pros is apparently harder than ever. But do you share that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Elway in the draft, I see him as being actually one of the best and savviest GMs in the draft in the 4 years that he's been in Denver as the top dog there. I mean, he's made some questionable picks, Monte Ball being one of them. You're not going to hit on every single draft pick in every single draft. The Seahawks haven't hit on every pick in every draft. The Patriots haven't. I mean, it's very rare. You hear the old adage that the goal is to get 3 to 4 starters out of every draft. That's actually pretty ambitious. I think if you basically plan it around, we want our top 3 picks every year to be eventual starters, that's probably more realistic as to how draft war rooms are looking at it, how general managers are looking at it. But the reality is Elway inherited a team coming off a 4-12 season. His maiden draft class was phenomenal. I mean, he made the right decision with Von Miller at number 2. He got Franklin in the second round, which has been his best offensive line pick. And frankly, as a quick aside, I was very disappointed to see Franklin go in free agency this year. He was the best, at least, with the team making the unfortunate decision to kick Vasquez out to right tackle. Franklin playing at a new position at left guard last year, I think, was actually the team's best offensive lineman all around. But we got Raheem Moore, who, even though he had his big bungle in the divisional round playoffs in 2012,
wasn't all his fault. I think it was more Tony Carter's fault.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into it as far as the whole Raheem Moore thing. And he might not have turned into the big ball hawk that John Elway hoped that he would become, but he was at the very least a solid draft pick, started most of his 4 years in Denver. And then you go through and you had Quinton Carter in the 4th round. You had Julius Thomas. Virgil Green came out of that same draft. So 2011 was a very profitable class for Elway. 2012, Derek Wolfe has been a key cog on the defensive line. You had Danny Trevathan in the 6th round. And then you had Brock Osweiler, which was the big thing. But you can't fault John Elway for picking a future quarterback early. I mean, I could see why some people would say, well, why go early when you have Peyton Manning? But at the very least, you can't fault Elway for taking someone, a rookie quarterback that year, because even though they were confident enough in Peyton Manning's, the status of Peyton Manning's health and the regeneration of the nerves in his neck and all that, they still, until the pads go on and until the live bullets fly, you don't really know how it's going to shake out. And they had to have not only an option that could step in immediately if things went south with Manning and get the job done, but they also had to have a plan for the future. And even though that pick, that 2nd round pick, hasn't, we quite haven't seen that pay off yet for the Broncos, who's to say that it's not going to pay off in spades when Manning finally hangs it up? So, without going through every single pick Elway's ever made, I definitely take exception to the notion that he has struggled in the draft. I think he's hit on far more picks than he's missed. And, as a free agent, talent evaluator and a front office closer, I would argue and submit that in the 4 years John Elway's been a front office executive, nobody has been better at going out and getting top level, tier 1 free agents, bringing them to Denver, and oftentimes bringing them to Denver on contracts that, are relatively team friendly. So, John Elway, I think, has done a phenomenal job of turning the franchise around, getting them back on track, getting fan belief back to where it needs to be. And now the Broncos, year in and year out, are Super Bowl contenders. And, playing devil's advocate, it's, how much of that has to do with Peyton Manning? We won't know for sure until he rides off into the sunset. And I think the first year, just like I was saying earlier, if Manning were to go down, I think the very first year the Broncos would struggle. I think they'd probably compete for a wild card berth, but I think over time, the way he has the roster constructed, the Broncos are built, using his cliche, to not only win now, but to win from now on. It's all going to come down to, is Osweiler the player they think he is? And we probably won't know that for some time.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And also Malik Jackson, another key member of that 2012 draft class, and we'll get to him later on. And there's several other picks that have yet to pan out completely from the 2013 to 2014 classes as well. And now moving on to the rest of the offense. You mentioned Peyton Manning, and like it or not, folks, he remains like I said, he remains the straw that stirs the drink here in Broncos country. And there's been a lot of debate about his performance in the second half of last season. Was it more due to age, or was it more due to the quad injuries? While I believe both played a factor, in my personal opinion, and after reading some articles, especially the article by Greg Bedard of the MMQB.com, which is what Broncos fans should definitely read, I side with Bedard more. I think it was more due to the injury than to the age, because I don't buy into this notion that all of a sudden Father Time appeared out of nowhere and took Peyton Manning by the neck, the proverbial neck, and turned him and made him old all of a sudden. I just don't buy that. And he was looking actually quite solid in the first half of the season. I think shaky offensive line play and the quad injuries had more to do with it than age. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not personally one of these analysts who is on the bashing Peyton Manning train. I think that more than anything, his quad played a role in what happened down the stretch. And of course, in the divisional round playoff loss to the Colts. I think that really one of the things too that factored into the Broncos collapse was the fact that I think John Fox's message and his approach as the head coach began to not resonate with his players anymore. And it kind of became one of those things where Elway had to, when the season was over, figure out a way, it's adapt or die. And Gary Kubiak was sitting out there. He didn't have a head coaching job. He saw the opportunity. He saw the guy that he probably always wanted to be the head coach of the Denver Broncos, and he went out and got him. Now, tying that into Peyton Manning, you're going to see, Matt Schaub in Gary Kubiak's offense went over 4,000 yards 2 or 3 times, 2 Pro Bowls. If he can do that, you're going to see Peyton Manning have a very prolific season, I think. We're not going to see 50 touchdowns, obviously. But Peyton Manning's, I think, going to be more efficient. He's going to stay healthy, I believe, personally. At least his chances to stay healthy are going to be increased with that running game, leaning on the running game. And even like I talked about earlier, with the questions surrounding the inexperience on the offensive line, one thing people have to keep in mind is that, the tight ends are going to play a big role in helping to protect Peyton Manning and also keep defenses on their toes, because they're going to throw a lot out of 2 tight end sets. And so Peyton Manning, I think I've said this for a long time, people who follow me and follow my writing, I think Peyton Manning's going to play out his whole contract. I think he sticks around through 2016 personally. Health willing, unless something catastrophic happens, I really do see Peyton Manning playing out his contract with the Broncos. And I'm really excited to see how he continues to progress with Kubiak, because as he's talked about, he likes being under the microscope, so to speak, and having to be even more engaged in learning a new system and impressing new coaches. And that whole process for him is what he lives for. I mean, he loves every aspect of football, which is why he's still playing. And so I think that dynamic of having to prove himself to new coaches, prove himself to the doubters of all of the, sentiment in the media and in part of the fan base that, he's Father Time has finally caught up to him. All those things I think are going to combine for us to see a really interesting and very compelling Peyton Manning storyline in 2015. I think that's going to be analogous to his 2012 season with the Broncos. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people.
I'm hoping and praying he does as well. And but the biggest question that a lot of people in league circles have about Peyton Manning is how will his style of play mesh with Kubiak's offense? And in Gary Kubiak's system, Peyton Manning isn't the most ideal fit, because in Kubiak's system, he requires his quarterback to be more under center than in shotgun, and he gives them less freedom to audible plays. And Peyton Manning's mantra is audibling pre-snap to put his players in the best position to succeed on that given play. So the biggest question is, and I think this is going to be fascinating to watch, how much of the 2015 Broncos offense will be Kubiak-centric? How much of the 2015 Broncos offense will be Peyton Manning-centric?
Yeah, there's going to be a happy medium. I think it's going to primarily be based around Kubiak's scheme, but they're definitely going to lean on Manning's predilections and the things he likes to do and the things that he's good at. When it comes to him fitting or not fitting Kubiak's scheme, again, I point to Matt Schaub. And Matt Schaub, I think it's safe to say, is not the most athletic or mobile quarterback in the history of the NFL. And yet he managed to have some very prolific seasons under Kubiak. And when you factor in the Broncos bringing in Wade Phillips and basically planning around having a defense that can help them win games, I think the Broncos are poised to surprise a lot of people this season. All things considered, I think that, if you listen to what Elway had to say at the Combine, it's his opinion that this is the perfect offense for an aging quarterback. And so I think when it's all said and done, you're going to see Peyton Manning surprise a lot of people, just like he did coming back from his neck surgeries in 2012.
That is the outcome we are obviously hoping for. And let's move on to another interesting point of debate in the offense is the running game. And everybody, obviously, because of his performance last year, everybody's expecting C.J. Anderson to be the main dog and to be like a workhorse. And some people are saying he can run for like 1,500 plus yards in Kubiak's system, which is a reality. But there's also chatter about Monte Ball, like eating into those carries rather significantly. As it's almost as Ball said, it's like a 1A 1B type of timeshare could emerge, at least if you believe what Monte Ball and his camp are saying. So my question is, will C.J. Anderson be the workhorse, or will we see like a 1A 1B 50-50 split between him and Monte Ball?
No, I don't think that's. I think you're going to see a as you said, a healthy dose of Monte Ball, but it's not going to be a 50-50 split. I think C.J. Anderson proved last year that he has a special skill set. See, the biggest issue I've had with Monte Ball is I'm a believer in Monte Ball in that, I don't see him as being a wasted pick, or I don't see him, I think last year his, other than, it goes without saying, his groin injury derailed his season. But, if you watch those first couple weeks when he was healthy, more often than not, his first point of contact came behind the line of scrimmage. And I don't care who you are. I mean, you see clips of C.J. Anderson, that one clip against the Colts in the divisional round, breaking like 5 tackles. You know, he should have been taken down for a 3 or 4 yard loss, and he ended up getting the first down and all that. That's the difference between he and Monte Ball. Monte Ball is a guy who might make the first guy miss, but he's probably not going to make the second guy miss. C.J. Anderson can make the first guy miss on the first level, get to the second level, make that guy miss, and then, you know, he's off to the races. And I think in Kubiak's system, he's going to be the man, and we might see numbers get thrown up from C.J. Anderson that we haven't seen since, you know, the dog days of the Shanahan era, with running backs getting 1,400 and 1,500 yards rushing. Now, I don't want to set the bar too high, but I think that you're going to see C.J. Anderson average about 100 yards from scrimmage week in and week out for the Broncos, provided he can stay healthy.
I believe so too. And also CJ's skill set is tailor-made for the zone blocking system, in which you like plant your foot in the ground, read the 3 technique defensive tackle, and hit that hole very hard. That is the name of the game with CJ Anderson. Monty Ball, not so much. But that said, Monty Ball is capable to get you like the hard yards and short yard situations that we could see him used in those scenarios to give CJ a breather. But another running back that's turned heads in OTAs and minicamp was Capri Bibbs. Capri Bibbs, another former Colorado State Ram, was on the practice squad last year, yet the Broncos had to promote him to the 53-man roster because like I heard, like it was the Buffalo Bills or a team like that was interested in his services, and he is like proving to be a natural in Kubiak's zone blocking system and is catching the ball out of the backfield with ease. That was one of the most impressive things about him in OTAs, and there's been a lot of talk about him beating out Ronnie Hillman for the final running back roster spot behind C.J. Anderson, Monty Ball, and Juwan Thompson. Do you see Capri Bibbs doing that and making the final 53-man roster, and Ronnie Hillman finding himself on the outside looking in?
Yeah, unfortunately for John Elway's reputation as a draft guru, I do see that happening. But at the same time, you know, getting Capri Bibbs out of the undrafted talent pool also shows that Elway has an eye for the college draft or talent pool anyway. Capri Bibbs, I think that I agree, he's well suited to the zone scheme. I was really excited by what I saw him do last year in the preseason. You know, and the scheme back then wasn't quite as well situated or suited to his skill set. But he broke some records at Colorado State, running out of the zone scheme a lot of the time. And I think he's continuing to progress on that curve. And we're going to see him. I think he's going to be one of the guys in training camp that you're going to hear everybody talking about. He's going to be a key guy, you know, in all the blogs and the notes from camp and all that. Capri Bibbs, provided he stays healthy, I think he does beat out Ronnie Hillman for a job on the 53. And I think Thompson they keep because, you know, past experience, what he's already accomplished, plus his ability to, if they needed him to in a pinch, he could play fullback. So his versatility, his tough nose, you know, downhill running, his physicality, I think you're going to see C.J. Anderson, Monte Ball, Bibbs, and Thompson round out their running back group.
I agree completely. And Ronnie Hillman, as good as he played for us in those starts last year, his style does not fit the zone blocking system, because he's a dancer around in the hole, and you need guys to basically plant and go for running backs who plant and go running backs in the zone blocking system. I'm mumbling too much, but before we move on to the defensive side of the ball, I want to talk about 2 potential breakout candidates for the Broncos offense this year. And some Broncos fans were crying. There were some on Twitter that were crying about John Elway letting Demaryius Thomas get his payday with the Jacksonville Jaguars instead. But I believe these are 2 reasons in 4 words, why I don't think the Broncos will miss Julius Thomas as much as many people think. Cody Latimer, Virgil Green. You mentioned Cody Latimer early. I was elated when the Broncos took Cody Latimer. For the record, I live in Evanston, Illinois, where Northwestern University is, and I saw Cody play his either sophomore year of college against Northwestern when Indiana came here to play, and he made the most ridiculous catch I have ever seen in person. I was jumping for joy when we drafted Cody Latimer, and his rookie season unfortunately didn't pan out well as he had a difficult time digesting Peyton Manning's playbook. But even though we're not going to do 3 wide receiver sets, I see Cody Latimer as a big red zone weapon for the Broncos to help ease the loss of Julius Thomas. And his numbers might not be too sexy, but I think we could see like a 6 or 7 touchdown year out of Cody Latimer this year. Do you think Cody Latimer delivers that production this year for the Broncos?
I do. And for the record, I was very high on Latimer coming out of the draft last season. I loved him. He was either my first or second rated wide receiver. And a lot of people don't believe me when I say that because of how stacked that receiver class was in 2014. But, you know, one thing people have to keep in mind too with Latimer is as a rookie, you know, he was stuck on a depth chart behind 3 Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers. You know, when he started out, obviously Sanders hadn't made the Pro Bowl yet. Last year was the first year Sanders made a Pro Bowl, but he was stacked and buried behind 3 very good, very experienced, very prolific players in Demaryius Thomas, Wes Welker, and Emmanuel Sanders. I didn't expect to see, even if he would have immediately taken to the playbook like a natural and a veteran, I didn't expect to see much of Cody Latimer as a rookie. And so I wasn't too disappointed in his season as a lot of people were. This year, yeah, I think that we can expect to see somewhere between 5 and 7 touchdowns for Cody Latimer. And depending on what happens with the Demaryius Thomas situation, maybe even more. And, you know, as far as Julius Thomas, I personally have not shed any tears in his departure. I'm super excited to see what Virgil Green can do. I really think we're going to see him break out because as big of a beast as he is in the running game, he's extremely underrated in his athleticism and his abilities as a receiver. I did a film piece a little while back on him, and I'm just excited to see what Virgil Green can do in a tight end oriented offense, on the field a lot of snaps. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will be very interesting to see how that plays out. And how appropriate you mentioned Virgil Green, because that was the next potential breakout star I have in the Broncos offense in Virgil Green. You mentioned his underrated receiving abilities. He was the lead receiver for the University of Nevada when somebody named Colin Kaepernick was playing quarterback there. Colin Kaepernick and him were like, he was Colin Kaepernick's favorite target in that scheme. People forget that. And he had superior combine measurables to Julius Thomas too. And even better, his blocking is ace, and Julius Thomas can't even block the sun. So he's a much more well-rounded tight end. But nonetheless, at least Cecil Lammey of ESPN Denver and Bleacher Report, one of my favorite reporters on the Broncos beat, said that if there is one thing that he isn't quite as good as Julius is the smoothness in and out of breaks on routes. So that is why he doesn't expect Julius Thomas type numbers from Virgil Green. But I still think he could have a very solid season, like 40 catches and like 5, 6, 7 touchdowns, kind of like Cody Latimer. Do you?
I mean, I actually see Virgil Green having better numbers than that. And, you know, one thing, and Cecil makes a great point in that, but one thing that you got to keep in mind is Green might be behind the curveball as a route runner because of his inexperience. You got to think of how many snaps Julius Thomas has played as a receiver with the Broncos compared to Virgil Green. You can't even compare the two. And so a lot of that's going to come from practical application, repeating it over and over, actual playing with live bullets. I think Virgil Green is going to be the primary tight end, not just as the blocker, but as a receiver. I know that, Owen Daniels has experience in the scheme. The coaches know him, that he's the veteran and all that. And he's going to see plenty of looks and plenty of opportunities himself. But I think Virgil Green will emerge as the primary tight end, including as a receiver. And, we're not going to see probably any numbers close to what Julius Thomas has put up over the last 2 years just because of the change in scheme. But, yeah, I could see Virgil Green having 50 or 60 catches, actually, and close to double digits. It just depends on how it all shakes out. When they're in the red zone, is Kubiak and Denison, are they going to be more oriented toward, looking for Demaryius Thomas? Are they going to be looking for tight end? It's hard to say right now at this point. We won't really know for sure until we get to that, to the regular season. But I'm really excited to see what Virgil Green can do out from under the shadow, so to speak, of Julius Thomas.
Indeed, he's one of my most. He's a guy I'm very excited about as well. And you and I share the exact same sentiment on Virgil Green. And when keep in mind, he had a very healthy free agent market. The Bears and John Fox made a run at him, and the Chargers made a run at him, and he had several suitors. So this guy is no slouch, folks. Watch out for him. Virgil Green. And now moving on to the defensive side of the ball, and this is the side of the ball that has a lot of Broncos fans giddy this year because of how it's going to look with Wade Phillips coming in to replace Jack Del Rio, who's now the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. Better fit for him, in my opinion. But Wade Phillips, a lot of people, there's some people in the national media said, "Oh God, I would have kept Jack Del Rio over Wade Phillips easily." I don't think they watched the tape of the Colts where Del Rio, his game planning was clueless by matching up your second best corner, Akeem Talib, on T.Y. Hilton, and not trying to. Well, obviously, it's hard to blitz Andrew Luck, to be fair, but by like not unleashing your pass rushers to get a superstar quarterback like Andrew Luck, who, on the side note, I think he could go down as the greatest of all time when all is said and done, even better than Peyton, even better than Brady, even better than Montana and Marino. I seriously feel that way about Andrew Luck, and I just can't express that enough. But to not use your best players to stop Andrew Luck like that, that's suicide. So I think Wade Phillips is leaps and bounds a major upgrade over Jack Del Rio. Do you think the same way?
I do. Even though Del Rio and his time as a coordinator here fielded either, I know for a fact, 2 top 5 defenses, might have been 3, but I know for sure 2 top 5 defenses. It never quite felt that way. You know what I mean? It never quite felt like, you never saw the Broncos defense. I shouldn't say never because I don't like using absolutes, but you didn't see the Broncos with the kind of talent they had on defense just take over games like you would expect them to do with names like Von Miller and, Elvis Dumervil when he was here and Champ Bailey when he was still playing at a high level. And, even last year when you had DeMarcus Ware on one end, Von Miller on the other, a stacked interior on the defensive line, 3 Pro Bowlers in the secondary, and a very talented rookie in Bradley Roby. I mean, you just didn't quite see them be the difference in the team winning or losing a game, like you see from the Seahawks, for example. More often than not, the Seahawks defense are the deciding factor on whether or not they get a W or L in the column week in and week out. And with going back to the difference between Del Rio and Phillips, I think that Phillips has more of his philosophy is a little bit more geared toward the type of talent the Broncos have right now on defense. 2 premier and now 3, if you consider throw Shane Ray into that mix, pass rushers who are just going to be allowed to get after the quarterback, read the play. If it's a run, set the edge or get contain on the backside pursuit or whatever, or get after the quarterback. That's it. You're very rarely going to see Von Miller or DeMarcus Ware, dropping back into coverage. Phillips has already said over and over, and if you look at his track record as a coordinator and a defensive mind, they're going to get after the quarterback. It's going to be a little bit more of a simple process for the Broncos defense. a lot less thinking and a lot more reacting, which is what you want to see from elite athletes like the Broncos have on that side of the ball. So, yeah, I wasn't sad to see Del Rio go. Even if he wouldn't have taken that job, he wasn't going to be the defensive coordinator for Gary Kubiak. So Wade Phillips, I'm glad that he's back in Denver, and I'm really excited to see how this unit performs under his leadership.
I'm excited too, and one of those names you mentioned is Shane Ray, the Broncos' first-round draft pick. They traded up 5 spots to get him, and at first, I wasn't very high on Shane Ray, and you told me the same thing. I wanted Malcolm Brown initially, as did you, but I still have doubts about Shane Ray. Like, there are a lot of people who think he doesn't fit in a 3-4 defense at all, that his best fit is like a wide 9, 4-3 end or something like that. But you said that you have grown to love and appreciate the Shane Ray pick a lot more. Like, about all those doubts people have about him. Undersized, one-trick pony, not a fit for the 3-4 system and all that. What makes you think that the Broncos actually made the right choice by selecting Shane Ray?
Well, I wouldn't quite go so far as to say that I've now learned to love the pick. I still have my doubts, but I'm a lot higher on the selection than I was when his name came across the television airwaves. But what I think, I do think, I mean, if I'm being honest, I think he is better suited for a wide 9 defensive end, personally. However, I think working with guys like Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware, playing in a simple or a little bit more boiled down, simplified system that is Wade Phillips' scheme, I think you're going to see him on third down come in and just be another force that the opposition is going to have to account for. I'm really excited to see how Phillips, I should say, cooks up ways to get him involved on defense. But, I do have my doubts. Would I go so far as to call him a one-trick pony? Maybe not quite that far, but he really is. He does have his limitations. I'm not one of those guys that saw him as a top 10 talent. The Broncos did. The Broncos had him as their number 10 overall rated player on their big board. So I think at this stage we have to trust Elway and the process. And I think that as far as going into a situation as a rookie, Ray is very fortunate in playing with 2 guys who probably, when it's all said and done, are going to be in the Hall of Fame in Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out with Shane Ray. But it's also a plan for the long term. I mean, DeMarcus Ware wasn't quite the difference-making force I think that John Elway expected him to be last season. I mean, really, when you look at it, how much better was he than Sean Phillips in 2013? I mean, if you compare the two, I would take DeMarcus Ware, obviously, over Sean Phillips. But when it comes down to production, it was 6s. I mean, it was about the same. And they're paying DeMarcus Ware about $9 million a year more than they were paying Sean Phillips for that same production. So the Shane Ray pick was a preemptive move because, if DeMarcus Ware has another season this year like he did in 2014, the Broncos I can't remember my exact research on it because it's been a while since I looked at it, but they can save close to $10 million on the cap by cutting him next year after this season. So if that's how it shakes out, then and Shane Ray hits as a rookie, Elway's going to look like a genius. And worst case scenario is, we don't fully see the Shane Ray's fruition as a player until DeMarcus Ware plays out his contract. But he's definitely part of the Broncos' long-term, paradigm. So.
Yes, and like you said earlier, Shane Ray was drafted to replace DeMarcus Ware. He wasn't drafted to replace Von Miller because Shane Ray is more of a number 2 pass rusher and not a lead dog pass rusher. I'm not saying Shane Ray is a bad player. I think he's got a lot of gifts, but like if you were looking to a more realistic pro comparison, I've heard and that I've agreed with from scouts, Junior Gillette and Anthony Spencer are 2 names that come to mind when they compare Shane Ray. But he was compared by Charles Davis of NFL Network to Elvis Dumervil, and come to think of it, Elvis Dumerville's kind of a similar player. He has his limitations as well. He's a liability in run defense. He can't drop back in coverage. But if you could make it work with Elvis Dumervil in a 3-4, why can't you make it work with Shane Ray in a 3-4 either? So I think the Broncos probably saw Elvis Dumervil and Shane Ray.
Yeah, and comparing him to Spencer and Gillette, I think that Ray's a little bit more of an explosive athlete than either of those guys are, but I can still see the comparison. And also, comparing him to Dumervil, you're right. When Dumervil was in Denver, last year Dumervil's season was ridiculous, but as a run defender, Dumervil falls short of the mark. You can't expect him snap in, snap out to set the edge in the run game. But I can see the comparison with Shane Ray and Elvis Dumervil, because Dumervil and Ray both have exceptional skills as a pass rusher. But one thing that sets Dumervil apart is those long arms, man. His opponents are never quite prepared or ready for those long arms of Elvis Dumervil. So that's one thing that Shane Ray can't quite match up with on old Elvis.
Indeed, that's the knock on Shane Ray. His size and arm length had many scouts perplexed on him. But I hope and pray that Shane Ray turns out to be that productive bookend to Von Miller long term for the Broncos. But a lot of people are saying the Broncos could potentially lead the NFL in sacks this year. Do you have a prediction on how many sacks DeMarcus Ware, Von Miller, and Shane Ray each will have?
I can't really say on on Shane Ray. I think you're going to see Von Miller go back to his 2012 production, where he's going to be knocking on 20 sacks, knocking on the 20 sack door, so to speak. And DeMarcus Ware, being optimistic, a lot of people are thinking you're going to see him go back to his heyday and how he performed with Phillips in Dallas and all that. I think that DeMarcus Ware has just kind of reached a point in his career where he's not going to be a 16 to 18 sack guy. He's just not. I'd be happy to see DeMarcus Ware get 10 sacks this year, just to be honest with you. And with Shane Ray, it's hard to say exactly where his stats are going to fall in. But, even if Shane Ray can get 5 sacks as a rookie, I think that will be playing behind Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware, that would be a big step in the right direction.
It definitely would be. And what has spending a little bit more on Shane Ray for just a second before we move on. I have my doubts still, as do you. I doubt he could be a Pro Bowl caliber player, but I still think he could be a good, productive player. Explain again what has made you grown to I actually understand the pick more because of DeMarcus Ware's age, and Ware is probably out of town, as you mentioned, next year, and Ray is the guy to fill those shoes that you all the pass rushers you could get to hunt down the Andrew Lucks of the world, so and the Tom Brady's and the Ben Roethlisbergers. So, but what were the details that made you appreciate the Shane Ray selection a little bit more?
Well, his savvy as a pass rusher. If you're going to get excited about Shane Ray in any shape or form, it's going to be what he can do rushing the passer. And really, my disappointment with the Ray pick when it happened revolved around 2 things. One, I liked Malcolm Brown right there, just because I'm not sold on Sylvester Williams ever turning the corner as a first-round pick and being that guy that they drafted him to be. So I liked another option there. I liked Malcolm Brown, who eventually fell to the Patriots. And the other thing was, I was not, the fact that Shane Ray got arrested 3 days before arguably the biggest day in his football career, I don't know. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But, going back to Ray on the positive side, Shane Ray is a high energy, high effort, high motor, explosive pass rusher. And in today's NFL, you don't have to be the most well-rounded technician to make a Pro Bowl. If you hit 15, 16 sacks, you're going to be high up on that ballot. And that might be what the Broncos lean on for Ray throughout his career, and hope that he continues to improve in his functional strength and his abilities to set the edge. So, and defend against the run. So right now I'm just focusing on, and I'm excited about the fact that if he can do anything, that kid knows how to get after the QB.
He most certainly does, and a lot of people, some people say he's boom or bust, but his ability to get after the QB at his hand usage and his advanced use of certain techniques to get after the passer made him a safe bet in the eyes of many experts that I respect as well. Were you hearing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, other than the risks of, and see, that's the thing is what Shane Ray got in trouble for. It's not so much that he got busted for possession of marijuana. It's that the decision-making process and the level of maturity at that specific point in time, really, you're going to take that risk. Even if you're going to pawn it off on it with somebody else with you or that it was just a weak moment in time or you weren't at the penultimate moment in your career, you're going to go off the rails like that and make that kind of a decision. It's that makes me question Shane Ray as a long-term viable, cornerstone type player that you expect a first-round pick to be. But I will say this: John Elway and the Broncos as an organization have, in the last 4 years, a solid track record of taking questionable character concerns and even looking at Von Miller. I mean, Von Miller was staring down.
Worse. Von was even more worse than Shane Ray. Right. Shane Ray just got a citation for marijuana. Von cheated on a drug test, and cheating on a drug test in any profession gets you fired.
Right, and he was on the verge of a full year suspension, and I think he still is if he has another infraction. And he's managed to turn it around. And the culture, the Broncos organizational culture and the culture in the locker room, I think should be a stabilizing force for a young guy like Shane Ray. And playing behind two premier guys, again, like Miller and Ware, and having classy guys with experience like Peyton Manning in the locker room, and even Chris Harris Jr., TJ Ward, and Aqib Talib, guys who know how to get it done in the NFL, know how to be. I mean, I can see why some people question, the character of TJ Ward or Aqib Talib. They've had their own brushes with, off the field issues, But Shane Ray's coming in. Bottom line, though, is that Shane Ray's coming into a defensive unit that's replete with stars and guys who know how to behave and perform on the field like a pro. And so that should be, I think, a saving grace, along with the Broncos organizational, just the culture that he's walking into in Denver.
I believe that's the case. And also the fact that he showed remorse for what he did spoke a lot of volumes as well. And that was, I believe, the deciding factor is why the Broncos decided to move up to get him. And now let's move on. It's appropriate you mentioned Sylvester Williams because now I want to talk about the nose tackle position. Like you, I'm not sold on him as the answer at nose tackle. But my first question, I think the worst move the Broncos made offseason, the worst, in my humble opinion, was letting Terrence Knighton go. But a lot of your colleagues at Mile High Huddle say Terrence Knighton doesn't fit the modern-day Wade Phillips scheme because Wade Phillips likes his 3-4 nose tackle 320 pounds or under, and he wants them to have defensive end type speed to get after the quarterback as well. Did you think the Broncos? Are you in my camp that the Broncos made a catastrophic mistake by letting Terrence Knighton walk? Or were you skeptical about his fit in the current Wade Phillips system?
Well, I just didn't see the sense in paying the kind of money. I mean, even though at the end of the day, Knighton settled for far less than he originally set out to earn, what he got from the Redskins. In the very beginning, when the two camps, the point of demarcation, if you will, you can't give a max contract to a guy like Terrence Knighton, who is struggles with weight issues week in and week out, and B, doesn't play 90% plus of your defensive snaps. And so it didn't make sense to, in a perfect world, sure, I would have loved for Terrence Knighton to stick around. But at the end of the day, you have to factor those things in, compare it with salary cap ramifications, and also, you have to factor in scheme, as you talked about. It's not that I don't think Terrence Knighton would have excelled in Wade Phillips' scheme. It's that I don't think he could have played more than 50% of the snaps. And a guy like Sylvester Williams, who does, I mean, even though he's underperformed so far in his career, if you're going to look at the positives or an outlook for optimism at this stage, it is that he does fit the quintessential mold for what Wade Phillips prefers for his nose guard position. A guy who's very athletic for his size, is quick and explosive, and a guy who can excel at penetrating, rather than just consuming blocks, which I think, again, staying on a positive side with Williams, I think provided his motor and his effort issues get corrected and he raises the bar in that regard, we could see him finally turn the corner, even though I'm not convinced yet, just going off of, his previous track record. But he does fit that mold, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But with Terrence Knighton, I'd love to see him stick around, but at the end of the day, I'm not shedding too many tears over it.
Good point. I hope we're not shedding too many tears about it either, because that really, personally, worries me. But another reason for optimism I feel about Sylvester Williams is not only did you bring in Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips, you brought in Bill Kohler to coach the defensive line, and Bill is known as a defensive line mastermind. He worked under the Lovie Smith defense in St. Louis in 2001 as that defensive line coach. And I remember watching that team, and that was a very tremendous defense. And obviously his recent work with J.J. Watt. Yes, J.J. Watt's the best defender of the NFL and a generational talent, but J.J. Watt has repeatedly said in interviews how much he valued Bill Kohler's teaching. And Bill Kohler is known for getting the absolute max effort out of his defensive linemen. And if there is any defensive line whisperer in the NFL, it is Bill Kohler, and he will get the most out of Sylvester Williams. Don't you think so?
I do. I think I'm glad you brought that up, because, his mindset is you're either a high motor, high effort guy, or I'm going to cut you. I mean, even Malik Jackson's been talking about that, in his post practice pressers, that, out on the field, the things you're going to hear from Kohler are, he's going to hammer you and be a stickler on technique and effort. And you know what? He's going to remind you constantly that if you don't toe the line and do it the way he wants it done, there's the door. See you later. You will be gone. And I think for a guy like Sylvester Williams, who's this, and who knows exactly what his mindset is, but, trying to project it out a little bit. Here's a guy who, I'm a first-round pick. I have the full faith and investment of the organization, and I'm out here on the field, and you're telling me that if I don't do what you want me, I'm on the roster bubble. Okay, I'm gonna step it up. And I think, yeah, Kohler has the track record of getting the most out of guys. I mean, under Bill Kohler, you saw Antonio Smith, who's got his own problems right now, but he made a Pro Bowl under the coaching and tutelage of Bill Kohler. So yeah, I think he's the, this year he's going to be the team's secret weapon, so to speak, in getting the most out of guys like Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson and Sylvester Williams. Even though for guys like, at least speaking for Derek Wolfe, he's never been a guy who suffered from lack of motor or effort issues. But over on the side of Malik Jackson, discipline has been an issue for Jackson, as we've seen over the years, with stupid personal foul penalties, late hits, unnecessary roughness. And Kohler is going to demand him clean those type of things up.
Most definitely. And we'll get more to Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson in a second. But continuing on the nose tackle position for just a minute. By the way, we're down to our final minutes here, so we're going to pick up the pace here. The Marvin Austin is considered the main competition for Sylvester Williams at nose tackle. How much of a chance do you think he has of landing the starting job? But also, this is a two-part question. The Broncos drafted a nose tackle in the 6th round with Darius Kilgo out of Maryland, and from what I saw on tape, I liked it. He's a high motor guy. Like at least when he's on his game, like I saw him like chase the running back like 15 yards or so downfield, and that speaks volume. I'm very excited to see what Darius Kilgo can do. So the two-part question is: A, how much of a chance do you think Marvin Austin has of earning the starting job at nose tackle over Sly Williams? And how much of a role will Darius Kilgo have this year? Because they only have 3 nose guards.
Right. Well, and just playing off that, though, too, one thing to keep in mind is the Broncos also brought in Vance Walker, a free agent, last year played with the Chiefs. They've been rotating him in at nose tackle, too. So he's in the mix, at least from a rotational perspective. But if we're talking starter, a first-round pick is always going to be given the first opportunity to succeed. So, and the team has basically said it in so many words so far. You heard it from Phillips, Kubiak. Really, the job is Sly's to lose, okay? Now, going back to Marvin Austin, last season he played about half the snaps that Williams did. But he, in those fewer opportunities, outperformed Sylvester Williams significantly. And so, does he have a shot to beat Williams out? I don't think so, at least not going into, I think Williams will remain the starter going into the season. But if he falls short, yeah, then the next guy up, the next man up is going to be Marvin Austin. And speaking about Darius Kilgo, a lot of times on a team as stacked as the Broncos are and a, Super Bowl contender, not often do you expect 6th or 7th round picks to make the roster. Of all the guys the Broncos drafted toward the end this past draft, Kilgo stands the highest shot of making the roster. I see him being their number 3 guy and making the final 53. And we might not see a whole lot from Kilgo if everything goes as planned for the Broncos as a rookie. But I am excited to see what he can do in his limited opportunities. And again, I do think he'll make the final roster.
I do too. And Vance Walker, I can't believe I left that name out. I think he could be a very good value signing for the Broncos, given his abilities in defending the run, especially. But speaking of defending the run, let's move to another position that I am very concerned about right now, the inside linebacker position, especially with Danny Trevathan getting kneecap replacement surgery in the offseason and Brandon Marshall undergoing a Lisfranc procedure in March. And those are the 2 leading tacklers for the Broncos the past 2 seasons, Trevathan 2013 and Marshall 2014, respectively. And at first, I was angry that they didn't draft a single inside linebacker in the draft. However, Todd Davis, who started the final couple games last year, is really turning heads right now. So the 2-part question is, do you think the Broncos made a mistake in not drafting an inside linebacker? And what do the Broncos see in Todd Davis that makes them confident that he could have a similar emergence as Brandon had in 2014 and Trev had in 2013?
Well, all things being equal, okay, if we took injuries off the board and the concerns therein, I think the Broncos would be just fine with Marshall and Trevathan at inside linebacker. I'm not concerned about their size or measurables or anything like that, because if you compare Marshall's size and measurables and Trevathan's, let's say, to the San Francisco 49ers at the pinnacle of their success when they had Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman as their inside linebacking duo. If you compare their measurables, they're pretty dang close. So the question comes down to durability and injuries. And so, you got to be concerned because they're both coming off of off-season surgeries. I'm particularly concerned about Trevathan and that kneecap replacement and just everything he went through last year. I'm concerned about him holding up and just being the player that we saw him be in 2013 when he really emerged and turned the corner. But, going back to the depth, and why they didn't draft an inside linebacker, they had inside linebackers on their board. But when their picks fell to them, they had other guys rated higher, and that's just the way the draft went. Plus, you had to factor in that the previous season they drafted 2 linebackers in Lamine Barrow and Corey Nelson, who both made the final roster as rookies. They have them on deck, and then you had Todd Davis, as you mentioned. They also brought in Reggie Walker, who played with the Chargers the last couple of seasons, and so they were happy with their depth there, I guess, it's what I'm trying to say. And that kind of made the difference in them choosing to bolster their roster in different areas in the draft. But moving forward, Todd Davis has gotten some buzz, but count me in the camp of I'll kind of believe it when I see it. Todd Davis didn't really impress me in his opportunities. He started 1 or 2 games last year when Marshall went down, and after Nate Irving ended up on IR and all that, he and Johnson had to toe the line and stop the gap for 1 or 2 weeks. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. If Marshall and Trevathan, if they suffer any setbacks in their recovery, I think you'll probably see Davis and Steven Johnson get the first opportunity. Or they're probably running right now as the second team, the leading second team guys. So if either of those guys go down, they'll be the ones who get inserted. And then you have the young guys. And again, like Corey Nelson, he is your quintessential weak side linebacker, will linebacker in a 4-3 defense. But so are Marshall and so are Trevathan. So I think with coaching and scheme, the young group the Broncos have as far as their depth at inside linebacker, if things go wrong with Trevathan and Marshall, that will be where the rubber meets the road. That's going to be, what probably determines whether or not the Broncos succeed as a unit in 2015.
Very well could be. And another concern I have about Marshall, Dr. Gene Bramall, respected NFL sports medicine analyst who writes for footballguys.com. And he's very revered, folks. If you want to learn, want to go in depth about football injuries, Dr. Gene is the man. He was on Cecil Lammy's one of the Cecil Lammy's shows the other day, and he said it wouldn't surprise him if Brandon Marshall began the regular season on the physically unable to perform list. Do you see that happening, or do you see Brandon Marshall being ready to go by week 1?
Well, going off of Trevathan and Marshall both spoke after practice this past week. Both of them expect, if you listen to their own words, what they expect personally and what they're being told by the medical staff is that when training camp rolls around at the end of July, they are expecting to be able to at least participate in individual drills and then work their way into team drills and team practice. If I'm betting money on it, and I'm a little bit more doubtful of Trevathan making it back. Marshall's going to play 2015 out with 2 screws in his foot. And so just basing it off of those 2 guys and what we saw last year and how Trevathan struggled, fought back, and then could only make it through a game in less than a quarter, I'm a little bit more concerned about Trevathan starting the season completely healthy and on a full go. I think Marshall is probably a little bit more progressed in his timeline. But again, hey, I'm not the doctor like Gene is. Gene, I'm very familiar with Gene, and he's about as insightful and knowledgeable as they come in that department. But like I said, I'm a little bit more predisposed to be concerned about Trevathan just going off past experience.
Yes, it will be very interesting to see exactly how bad Brandon Marshall's Lisfranc injury actually was. Was it as bad as Ryan Clady's, or was it a milder version of the same surgery Ryan Clady had? And I definitely hope it's the latter, because that increases his odds of recovery. And he's actually one of several key players in the National Football League coming off that operation this past year, like Jimmy Smith of the Ravens and Jake Matthews of the Falcons had a similar procedure done on their foot. So best wishes to Brandon and all 3 of those guys as they make their way back. And down to our final 2 points of the night, the breakout stars on the Broncos defense. 3 guys I'm very high on. We mentioned Malik Jackson. We mentioned Derek Wolfe, who are going to be free agents after this season, and Bradley Roby. And my questions about Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson, I think they could be studs in
Sorry, buddy. My bad.
No problem. Things like that. But I actually think Malik and Wolfe can be studs in Wade Phillips' system, as I said. And the question is, do you see the Broncos retaining one of those 2 in free agency next year?
I do. I agree. I think Malik Jackson is going to have a breakout season. I think he's going to be prolific. He's going to be a pass rusher. He's going to be a beast in the run game. I'm really excited to see what he can do as a 5-tech playing with Kohler and in Phillips' scheme. But, going back to as far as contracts, it's going to be tough because depending on how they perform in contract years, comparing Wolfe and Jackson, who came into the league the same year, they've been together for 4 years with the Broncos. I think when it's all said and done, I think Jackson's probably going to command a little bit more money on the open market than Derek Wolfe. I think the Broncos might stand a better chance of being able to, kind of like they did at a smaller level, but kind of like they did with Harris last season, being able to find some common ground, bring him back on a team-friendly deal, keep him in Denver another 3 or 4 years. Speaking about Derek Wolfe. With Malik Jackson, that might be a little bit tougher to do because I do think you're going to see him really kind of explode as a pass rusher and an inside interior pass rusher in 2015. Can you bring them both back? Depends on exactly how explosive Jackson is. I mean, Wolfe, we might see that kind of progression from Wolfe too. I mean, playing in this scheme, what we've seen from guys like J.J. Watt and even Antonio Smith in his prime, I think you'll probably see the best. The ceiling for Derek Wolfe now is probably, what Antonio Smith was able to accomplish in Houston. And I wouldn't say that Jackson, we can expect anything close to what J.J. Watt has done as far as Jackson, but I see him being able to explode in a similar type of way as far as being an impact as a pass rusher. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will be, but you see them keeping at least one of those two if both play well.
I do. I see them possibly being able to bring Derek Wolfe back on a team-friendly deal, and even Jackson, just depending on what type of market's there for him after his contract year, and provided he stays healthy and all that.
Indeed. And the other potential breakout star I have is Bradley Roby. And Bradley Roby, yes, he was beaten for a lot of touchdowns last year, but what rookie cornerback wasn't? What rookie cornerback wasn't beaten for touchdowns? Kyle Fuller, one of my personal favorite cornerbacks from that draft class, had a good first couple weeks, but struggled against the Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelsons, Calvin Johnsons. So we shouldn't make too much of a big deal about the amount of touchdowns Bradley Roby surrendered. He made a lot of big plays when needed, especially his breakup on future Hall of Famer Reggie Wayne in that Week 1 victory against the Colts. And they were so thrilled with Roby's tackling ability, for a corner especially, that they're considering moving him to free safety. Are you a fan of Roby at free safety? And how well do you think he'll do this season, whether it's at free safety or at corner?
No, I'm not a fan of him moving to free safety, and frankly, neither is he. He sees himself as a corner, and all things being equal, he wants to stay at corner. And, as far as being a breakout star, I think you're going to see definite progress from Bradley Roby in his second season. I think you're going to see him solidify some of his lapses in coverage where he gave up touchdowns, and I think you're going to see him tighten that up quite a bit in his second season. But I don't think we're going to fully see Bradley Roby emerge as a breakout star until Aqib Talib, leaves the team, which could happen sooner than a lot of people think, just because of, how much money they're paying him and his future cap ramifications and all that. If they see a lot out of Roby and they like what they see in his progression in his second season, I'd have to go back and look at the exact cap ramifications, but I'm relatively certain that after this year, it wouldn't be too bad if the team chose to move on from Aqib Talib. So we might not see that level of explosion from Roby as a breakout star until Talib's ship sails and he's out of Denver. But I do think you're going to see Bradley Roby turn the corner and continue to progress as a cornerback. As a cornerback, not as a free safety. Darian Stewart is the team's free safety. People need to get used to that. If you see Bradley Roby at free safety, it's going to be in rare packages. They see him as a corner, and he sees himself as a corner.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I thought the Darian Stewart pickup was another great value signing by the Broncos in free agency this past spring. And final two questions before we wrap up. One has to do with special teams. Joe DeCamillis, the new Broncos special teams coach, said that unlike the latter part of 2014, the Broncos do not want to carry three kickers, in which they had Connor Barr kicking field goals, Brad McManus on kickoffs, and Britton Colquitt punting. They want to keep two. And there's been a lot of buzz, even though Mike Kliss still expects Britton Colquitt to keep his punter job despite underperforming that contract. Carl Schmitz has been really impressive at OTAs from what I hear. And how likely do you think, you wrote a column on this, that you think it's quite possible he beats Colquitt for that job because of his ability to punt and kick off, and it would make it much easier for the Broncos to keep 2 kickers if he's on the roster instead of Colquitt.
You know, if Britton Colquitt was making the veteran minimum, like most punters in the NFL do, I would agree with Mike that you're probably going to see Colquitt emerge as the punter when the regular season gets underway. But when you factor in that the Broncos could save more than $3 million on their cap if they moved on from Colquitt, it becomes a little bit more interesting and compelling towards Schmidt. DeCamillis, in that piece you referenced, I talked about what DeCamillis said, that so far the competition between Schmidt and Colquitt, in his own words, has been pretty even. And so his biggest concern with Schmitz so far, and apparently Schmitz has started to work through this and get better, is just knowing what to do, knowing where to line up, situational punting, and provided going into training camp, Schmitz can continue to progress there and give the Broncos more confidence that, you know, when the chips go down and it's the regular season and they need the ball to be pinned at, you know, X yard line or whatever, that Schmitz will be able to handle those duties. I think that he stands a very good chance of beating out Colquitt. Now, if we would have heard from DeCamillis that, you know, hey, what do you think? How's Schmitz doing? Do you think he can beat? How's the competition? If we would have heard from DeCamillis, you know, let's pump the brakes here. You know, the guy hasn't played football for 7 years. You know, we've got a guy in Colquitt who's a proven veteran. You know, let's just see how it goes, everybody. I would maybe be a little bit more inclined to see it the way that Mike Kliss does. But being that he's already come out and said that the punting competition is pretty even, and then factoring in Colquitt's cap number and basically being ineffectual the last 2 seasons, and as you said, underperforming on his mega contract that Elway gave him in 2013, I think it's a key position to keep an eye on in training camp. And no, I will not be surprised to see Schmitz win that job. And as you mentioned, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because Colquitt has no experience as a kickoff specialist, whereas Schmitz has been booming it, has been doing exactly what they need him to do. Hence, you know, we don't need to carry 4 specialists when you include the long snapper. We got a punter, we got a place kicker, and we got a long snapper. And that way we can keep an extra spot on our 53-man roster for a position that we might actually need, like another linebacker or another offensive lineman or even a corner. So I think that's how we'll see it play out. Their goal is to move into the season with 3 specialists, and I think they're going to stick to that.
I think so too, and I'm personally rooting for Carl Schmitz because that would give the Broncos the most flexibility of their options on special teams. And we got 5 minutes left, so I think there's time for 2 more quick questions. Another guy who's been turning heads in practices this spring is Kenny Ananicky. Kenny Ananicky coming as an undrafted free agent out of Duke University, from my recollection, I believe, last summer.
Right.
And he's got a lot of positive buzz coming out, and especially given that Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson are impending free agents, do you see Kenny Ananicky on the final roster, the 53-man roster this season?
You know, if the Broncos end up having to part ways with Antonio Smith because of this child abuse investigation, yes, I do. If that ends up getting dismissed and the local DA in Texas chooses not to indict Antonio Smith and he returns to the team, I think that greatly diminishes Ananicky's chances of making the final roster, and he might play out 1 more year on the practice squad. But if Smith is gone, yeah, that other defensive end position is basically Ananicky's to lose. And he's put on 10 or 15 pounds. He's really popped off the field, so to speak. He's been one of the stars so far in organized team activities, and it'll be interesting to see if he can continue that trajectory into training camp.
It will be as well. And we've come to the end of our show, and I would like to ask you a final question. If you had to predict today what the Broncos' final regular season record will be, I'm not going to get to playoff predictions and all that Super Bowl stuff because we obviously know in the National Football League anything can happen. But if you had a hunch at what the Broncos' record will be, regular season wise, what would your prediction be as of right now?
12-4. I see them winning the division again. 12-4, somewhere in there, maybe 11-5 at worst. I don't see them being any worse than 11-5. Just looking at their schedule and seeing that so much, as much as that has changed this offseason with coaching and scheme and all that, so much has stayed the same. Yeah, they lost Terrence Knight, and they lost Orlando Franklin, and they lost Julius Thomas and Raheem Moore, but they've also brought in some guys, low profile, not top tier free agents, but guys like Stewart and Vance Walker and Smith. Antonio Smith, if his off the field stuff ends up not becoming an issue, I see the Broncos hopefully. Well, I do see them going 12-4. My hope is that the changes that they've made achieves the objective that Elway has in keeping them more stable and productive down the stretch, and keeping Peyton Manning upright and healthy into the playoffs. And really also just that change of mindset and mentality, as Elway talked about, just that that fight, that intensity, that physicality, carrying that forward. Because, the Broncos have been awesome in the regular season, but when the competition goes up a level and the chips go down, and in the postseason, we've seen that intensity level and the Broncos not playing up to their talent. And my hope is that the changes that they've made, and I think we'll see it. We might not see the Broncos win the Super Bowl in 2015. I mean, I don't want to set the bar too high, but I think the Broncos are going to surprise a lot of people this season. It's not the Chiefs' year, and it's not the Chargers' year. As long as Peyton Manning is in Denver, it's their division to lose.
Thank you once again, Chad, for coming on to the show. And your insight and analysis is awfully tremendous. And once again, it's Chad Jensen, the managing editor of milehighhuddle.com on scout.com. And before we go, will you tell our listeners where we can find you in the Twitterverse or on the internet?
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at Chad N. Jensen, and you can follow Mile High Huddle at Mile High Huddle on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Mile High Huddle.
Thank you very much once again, Chad. We look forward to having you on the show again sometime very soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
You're very welcome. Chad Jensen, ladies and gentlemen. And that does it for tonight on Sports Krunch with Dkrom. But stay with us the rest of these 5 weeks. Yes, we know that these are the most boring. This is the most boring time of year for most sports fans, because now with the NBA Finals done, the Stanley Cup Finals done, we have a long 5 weeks to go before NFL training camp start off. But the boredom, it doesn't have to be that way, folks. We here at Sports Crunch with Dkrom will have you covered these next 5 weeks on all things football. We're going to break down every team from every division, and we're also going to give you advice on how to win yourself a fantasy football championship as well. So please stick with us. Sports Crunch with Dkrom. Follow me on Twitter at Dkrom. That's DKROM59. And we hope to see you for these next 5 weeks to keep up the enthusiasm as we wait for NFL training camps to begin. Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.